1. Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, the 38th President of the United States, who succeeded Richard Nixon after his resignation, had an impressive background before his tenure in the White House. As a Michigan native, Ford excelled as a football player at the University of Michigan during his college years. His talent contributed to the Wolverines winning 2 Big Ten Conference titles and national championships in 1932 and 1933, with both seasons ending undefeated in 1934. Despite the loss of other key players on the team, Ford gained recognition from professional football scouts. Both the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers even offered him football contracts, although he declined them. However, Ford's accomplishments at Michigan extended beyond the football field. In the same year, the Wolverines faced a game against the formidable Georgia Tech. Prior to the match, Georgia Tech publicly announced their refusal to play against Michigan due to the presence of Willis Ward, a black player on the Wolverines team. When Ford learned about this discrimination against his friend and teammate, he immediately took a stand. He firmly told his coaches that if Ward wasn't allowed to play, he would also refuse to participate. Ford remained resolute until Ward himself pleaded with the future politician to join the game and play alongside him. 2. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is primarily known for the scandalous end to his presidency in 1974. However, it is worth noting that his political career began with some questionable actions during World War II. Nixon was stationed in the Solomon Islands, where he gained notoriety among fellow service members for his exceptional poker skills. Nixon's reputation as a skilled poker player was not merely a myth or a product of exaggeration. In reality, he was able to accumulate a substantial amount of money by playing poker in the South Pacific Ocean during the war. He took a large portion of his winnings back home to California, which played a crucial role in financing his initial local political campaigns. In hindsight, considering the seemingly endless fundraising efforts in modern politics, Nixon's unconventional fundraising strategy might not have been as unfavorable as it appears. 3. Lyndon Baines Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson became the 36th President of the United States in 1963, following the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He served his own full term from 1965 to 1969. During his presidency, Johnson faced significant social unrest at home and the ongoing Vietnam War in Southeast Asia. Despite these challenges, Johnson maintained a folksy and jovial demeanor with his aides, friends, colleagues, and reporters. This down-to-earth Texan charm resonated with many, allowing him to win a second term and maintain a reasonable level of popularity despite the social problems and policy concerns of his time. Johnson's prior experience as a teacher may have equipped him to handle these difficulties. Few jobs are as chaotic as managing a classroom full of young students. Before entering politics, Lyndon B. Johnson spent 4 years as a teacher at a school located along the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Texas. Many of his students did not speak English, and Johnson did not speak Spanish. However, he persevered through those 4 challenging years. Later in his career, he credited this experience with shaping his education policies as president. 4. Harry S. Truman. After serving 12 years in office, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was succeeded by Harry S. Truman. However, there is an interesting fact about Truman's middle name. It is non-existent. Truman revealed to reporters that the S in his name did not stand for. It was a compromise made by his family to honor his 2 grandfathers, Anderson Ship Truman and Solomon Young. Instead of choosing one grandfather's name over the other, Truman used the initial S as a way to carry on their legacies. 5. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as the President of the United States for 3 terms, from 1933 to 1945. He led the nation during challenging times, including the Great Depression and World War II. Interestingly, there is evidence to suggest that FDR's DNA is connected to several other former presidents. This is not a casual remark. There are real genealogical connections between them. In fact, genealogists have identified at least 11 previous presidents who share a familial link with FDR. One of these connections is with Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, who was FDR's 5th cousin. This link is well documented and leaves no doubt about their familial relationship. However, beyond Theodore and Fidei's immediate family tree, genealogists believe there are additional distant connections to past presidents. 6. Calvin Coolidge. How familiar are you with Calvin Coolidge's presidency? It's likely that you don't know much about the 30th President of the United States. To some extent, this lack of knowledge isn't entirely his fault. Initially, Coolidge was never meant to be in a position of power. He was chosen as Warren Harding's running mate before the 1920 election. It seemed that Coolidge would simply serve as vice president, while Harding assumed the role of president after winning the election in 1921. However, 2 years later, Harding fell seriously ill and unexpectedly passed away in San Francisco. Halfway through his term, Harding's death created a need for a change in leadership. Suddenly, Coolidge was thrust into the position of president and given the opportunity to implement his own policies with full access to the White House. 7. William Howard Taft. The tradition of American leaders throwing out the first pitch at a baseball game has been around for over a century. It is often done on opening day in Washington or other Major League Baseball towns across the country. But have you ever wondered where this tradition originated? Well, you can thank William Howard Taft for that. Taft served as president from 1909 to 1913 and was a big fan of baseball. The sport was gaining popularity across the country during that time, although it had been invented in the mid-19th century. As baseball grew, it established professional circuits and became a massive success in terms of media and marketing by the early 20th century. Taft and his advisors recognized the potential of baseball, and on April 14, 1910, they took action. On that day, the Washington Senators hosted the Philadelphia Athletics in Washington, D.C. to start the 1910 season. Since then, this tradition has stuck. 8. William McKinley. He served a successful first term as president after being elected in 1897. The American people trusted him enough to re-elect him for a second term at the turn of the 20th century. However, tragedy struck only 6 months into his second term when McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist named Leon Czolgosz on September 6, 1901. In recognition of McKinley's legacy, the federal government chose to feature his likeness on the $500 bill years after his death. These green seal notes were issued by the Federal Reserve. Unfortunately, the $500 currency notes were discontinued. However, as the financial world evolves, there may be a possibility of seeing McKinley's face on currency once again. 9. Benjamin Harrison. During Benjamin Harrison's time in office, between Grover Cleveland's 2 terms, he made history by doing something unprecedented: hiring a woman. On January 2, 1890, Alice Sanger officially joined the White House staff as its first ever female member. Harrison was not known for his proactive leadership, as he primarily allowed Congress to handle public expenditures and little else. However, by appointing Sanger as a staffer and advisor, he demonstrated a willingness to acknowledge and support the growing women's movements in the country. Although Harrison did not fully endorse women's suffrage and other advancements, his decision to hire Sanger was a significant step toward achieving equality. The fact that no previous president had ever taken this step further highlighted a changing landscape in Washington. It would still be 3 decades, until 1920, before American women gained the right to vote. Grover Cleveland, the 22nd President of the United States, held office from 1885 to 1889. He secured this term by defeating his opponent James G. Blaine in the 1884 election. Initially, Cleveland may have believed he was in a comfortable position, poised to easily win a second term as the incumbent. However, things didn't go as planned, at least not immediately. In 1888, Cleveland lost the subsequent election to Benjamin Harrison. Interestingly, Cleveland won the popular vote that year in terms of the number of ballots cast. Unfortunately, the Electoral College did not favor him, leading him to withdraw from the race. He seemed destined to be remembered as a one-term president. However, it appears that resilience ran in the Cleveland family. He was nominated once again in 1892 to challenge Harrison. This time, Cleveland not only won the popular vote, but he also gained the necessary Electoral College votes. As a result, Cleveland reclaimed the presidency, becoming the 24th leader of the nation.